Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome all to our MAG Transportation Safety Committee meeting today. We'd like to go ahead and we're going to start with call to order. So I need a roll call to confirm that we have quorum. It looks as though we do online, but I will go through and I'm going to read off your name, and if you can please unmute, say that you are here, and we will move that way. So to start with, I'm trying to pull up the participation list.
Carl, we found it easier in the past couple of meetings if you use the sign-in sheet that I provided you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, Carrie Wilcoxian, you here? Okay, Shane Tiso.
Yes, sir, Carl, I'm here.
Thank you, Shane. Tom Peterson of Avondale. I don't see Tom. John from Buckeye. No John. Raymond Hung from Chandler. Don't see Raymond. Nick Russo of El Mirage.
I'm here, Carl. Good morning.
Morning. Aaron Pinkerton of Gilbert.
I'm here. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you. Tony Apple of Glendale. Okay, I don't see Hugh Billuck from Goodyear.
Here.
Thank you, Hugh. Woodward from Litchfield Park. I don't see Woodward. Josh from Maricopa City. No Josh. Nicholas or Mazen from Maricopa County. Don't see them.
Carla, I do actually see Mazen. I'm asking him to unmute.
Oh, I missed him there. I do see him now.
Mazen, I've unmuted you. Okay, go ahead, Carl.
All right. We think you're there, Mazen, but if you can confirm, that would be good. All right, Rob Hudson of Mesa.
My dear, your meeting ID followed by pound.
Okay, Maria.
My meeting ID said Rob Hudson.
Thank you, Maria. Got you. Jeremy Knapp from Paradise Valley. Don't see Jeremy. Brandon Foray of Peoria.
Here.
Thank you, Brandon. Mohammed Youssef from Queen Creek.
Here, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Mohammed. Sam Taylor of Scottsdale.
Yep, I'm here. Good morning.
Morning, Sam. Thank you. Dana Oceana from Surprise. Dana, are you on? I thought I saw you on here.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Good morning. Kathy Hollow of Tempe.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Kathy, morning. Adrian Ruiz of Valley Metro. Jeff King of FHWA. Don't see Jeff. And then Alberto Gutierrez of GOHS. I don't think I saw Alberto. Okay. Are there any members participating by teleconference I didn't mention?
Hi, this is Siroja Devarkonda from ADOT, sitting in for Kerry Wilcoxon.
Thank you, Saruja. Anyone else?
It looks like we do have Raymond from Chandler. Raymond, can you unmute? Okay, and then also we do have Chris Botchin from Pinell County. He's proxying for Kathy Borquez, who's actually retired. So Chris, if you could unmute.
I'm sorry, Margaret. I wasn't sure if you wanted me to introduce myself, but yeah, I am attending on behalf of Kathy Borquez. I'm meeting with her later today. She may be coming back on a part-time basis, and so that she would be attending these meetings going forward, if that works.
And I just wanted to note, Mr. Chair, that I didn't do this the last time, but I did want to welcome Kathy Hollow, who is Tempe's representative now, established with Julian being promoted to city engineer. Chris just introduced himself, and we may be having Kathy for a few months in the future. And then I would also like to mention and welcome a new member to the safety committee in Queen Creek. We have Mohammed Youssef. So welcome to all three of you to the safety committee. Thank you.
Welcome to the three of you. We're glad that you're joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So with that, we do meet quorum. So quorum is now present. This meeting of the MAG Transportation Safety Committee is called to order at 10:08 now. Sorry, it took us a little while to go through the committee roll call. We'd ask everyone to please mute your speakers to eliminate any feedback. You will have opportunity to speak by indicating so in the chat to be recognized. Once recognized, you can please unmute your phone or device to speak top. When you begin talking, please state your name and your organization so that everyone can know who you are. All right, so with that, we'd like to have the approval of the minutes. So we all had an opportunity to see the minutes from the previous meeting held on June 23rd. You have a chance or had a chance to look at those briefly. We'd like to have a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion to approve.
All right, thank you, Maria. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second.
And who was that?
Kathy Hollow.
Kathy, thank you for that. Please indicate by unmuting your phone, or sorry, hold on. So we have a motion and we have a second. Now I need to take a roll call for the vote as well. So when I call your name, please indicate yay or nay on this. Shane?
Yay.
Thank you. Raymond from Chandler?
Say yay.
Nick Russo of El Mirage?
Yay.
Aaron Pinkerton of Gilbert? Is Aaron on the call or did I mess that up?
Let me check.
Maybe I checked that one wrong. Hugh Billock from Goodyear.
Yay.
Thank you. From Maricopa County. I think Maz is still having problems with his speaker. Mazen, if you can hear me, you can write into the chat yay or nay. Maria Deb from Mesa. Maria, yay or nay?
I'm muted, sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Brandon Foray from Peoria.
Yay.
Thank you. Mohammed Youssef from Queen Creek.
Yeah.
Sam Taylor from Scottsdale.
Yes.
Dana Oceana from Surprise.
Yes.
Kathy Hollow from Tempe.
Yes.
And Saruja from ADOT.
Yes.
And I believe the name was Chris Broxson from Pinal County.
That's Chris Botchin, Carl.
Botchin. Or is it Jason?
Jason.
Doesn't seem to be able to unmute or something at the moment. All right. Was there anyone that I missed?
Mr. Chair, it looks like John Willett was able to join us.
Excellent.
And I approve the minutes.
Thank you, John. All right.
Mr. Chair, Josh Plum with the City of Maricopa. I also joined late. My apologies. And I vote aye.
Thank you, Josh. All right. Is there anyone else at all that we missed on the motion for the minutes? Okay. Seeing none, with the motion and the second and the members polled, the motion passes. Thank you, everyone. All right. All right, next item is the program manager report. So at this time, we would like to turn it over to Margaret for her report and update to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation Safety Committee. I'd just like to remind you all again to please mute your phones to eliminate the feedback that we're getting, unless you want to speak, of course. I have a few items today, and I'm having trouble advancing. There we go. Okay, so the first item in my program manager's report today is a reminder about the crossing guard training. This is a training that we've been holding for a little over 15 years now at MAG. Phoenix was doing it for much longer than that. But this year we're going to be going virtual, just like everything else that we're doing, trying to slow the spread of this terrible disease and also still provide some of the resources that we have in the past. So on August 4th, we're going to be hosting a Zoom webinar from 9 a.m. To 11 a.m. We sent a reminder with a registration link to school superintendents on July 14th. We're getting a lot of interest, which is encouraging. I've had also crossing guards themselves or even schools call and ask me if they can be forwarded the link that was sent to the superintendents, and I'm happy to do that if you hear of any of your schools wanting to register for that event. All of you as well are encouraged to attend, and we can send you the link. I know we receive a lot of comments and requests from the guards asking if their local agency staff can be in attendance to answer questions that they might have on their specific crossing. So I sent out the invitation to some of you this morning. And as I get reports on who's registered, I will kind of compile those by local agency of the registrants and let you know that your guards will be attending. And if you could, if at all possible, please be in attendance. I will send you that invitation as well. We are going to be recording that. So it'll be shown through the Zoom webinar, but it'll be recorded. We're going to have the recording as a whole on the Safe Routes to School webpage that you see there below, but we're also going to be segmenting it in the different agenda items for the crossing guard training. So if you have a crossing guard that's a little bit more experienced and they just want to watch a certain portion of it, they can certainly access that on that Safe Routes to School page. In addition, those will be available to all of you and your schools throughout the year. And so if there are new guards that come on for a spring semester, they'll have access to that as well for training. The next item I'm actually going to turn over to Mohammed Shaheed. He is going to be the project manager for this fiscal year 2021 framework for predictive safety. So Mohammed, if you could unmute yourself and speak to this, I'd appreciate that.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Mr. Chair and member of the Transportation Safety Committee. So as you can see in the slide, we are planning to launch a fiscal year 2021 project to identify or to come up with the framework for predictive safety analysis. As you already know, ADOT has already made it one of their priorities in their the latest STSP that they will be adopting the highway safety manual based nationally recognized predictive safety analysis within the coming 2-3 years. So in line with that, we will be launching this project within this fiscal year. Our plan is to come up with scoping within the month of August and then issue the task order after that as soon as possible. So the main idea of this project is that we will try to assess what data gaps and data needs we have to come up with the framework for adopting predictive safety analysis in the MAG region. And we will also try to assess the applicability of this predictive safety analysis when it comes to network screening and also evaluation of safety projects, which are currently being funded by HSIP and in the future and coming years will be funded by RSP also. And one point I would like to mention here is that this project will be complemented with some of the ongoing MAG work that we are doing here on building safety prediction models for Arizona, especially MAG region. So as we are working on that effort, we will be providing an update to the Transportation Safety Committee in the coming months. So be in the lookout for that one. And we will also provide once this project scope is drafted and this task order is initiated, we will provide update to the safety committee about that one also. So with that, yeah, that's the update I have for this project. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Mohammed. So the next item, and I think this is the final item in my program manager's report, Mohammed and I are really excited to introduce to all of you Chris Gottsacker. He is our new transportation engineer too, and he will be in the transportation safety program with Mohammed and myself. And I'd also like to welcome Patrick Stone. He is the new Transportation Improvement Program Supervisor. Some of you may remember that Terry Kennedy left MAG earlier this year. She worked very closely with this committee when it came to the different funding programs that you all have oversight to. So with that, I want to please welcome both Chris and Patrick. Patrick is under John Bullen in the Transportation Economic and Finance Group. So I would like to ask Chris if he could unmute himself and say something.
Yeah. Hey, Margaret, thank you. And thanks to the committee as well. Happy to be here and happy to contribute and see what we can do. Currently, I'm in Wisconsin at my childhood home. I did my undergrad at St. Louis University and my graduate degree at the University of Washington. And I was working for a consultant out in Portland for about a year prior to this position. So yeah, really looking forward to working with you all.
And Patrick, if you wouldn't mind doing the same thing.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. A lot of you I actually do already know. I worked for the past 30 plus years with ADOT. For this committee, I was in the LPA section, and I also oversaw all of the federal aid funding for the state. So hopefully, looking forward to this, and I should be able to provide a lot of value to this committee. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. You all will be seeing quite a bit of Chris. One of his first tasks is to help kind of finalize the materials for the crossing guard training, virtual crossing guard training that's happening next week. So his main focus is going to be the safe routes to school, but he will obviously be helping Mohammed and I with all the other programs, projects, and initiatives that we administer through the Transportation Safety Program here at MAG. And with that, that concludes my program manager's report, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your report, Margaret, and welcome both to Chris and Patrick to the Safety Committee meeting. All right, so with that, we do have a minor change in the original agenda. We are going to move up the item for our Roadway Safety Program RSP Annual Report to be our next item and kick back item number 4. So we're going to be on item number 5 at this point. So this item here, in September of 2019, the MAG Regional Council approved the new Roadway Safety Program, or RSP, to be administered by MAG as a supplement to the Highway Safety Improvement Program. In October of 19, MAG issued the call for fiscal year 2020 and 2021 RSP project applications to request funding from the safety improvement projects. A review of the first RSP annual report, including a status update on the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 projects funded, will be provided to the committee members. The Transportation Safety Committee provides oversight to the programming and administers and administration of the RSP. This first annual report will be on the RSP webpage and updated on an annual basis upon the committee's recommendation. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Margaret and also John Bullen with MAG to discuss this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation Safety Committee. It is my honor to report to you the first draft of the annual report for the road safety program. We've come a long way. This is a funding program that we had been talking about for years and years, and last year we were finally able to get the ball rolling on this. And so it is in the procedures and policies that we provide this committee with an annual update, and so this is your first annual update. As you can see, this is going to be a one-pager. We want to make it simple, easy to read. It's not just for the committee's consumption, but also for the public at large, and any other policymakers or decision makers that happen to or want to see what the status of the RSP is. The main line can be reached for questions that calls can get to myself or Mohammed or Chris regarding this program. We do have a direct email address that's rsp@azmag.gov. And of course, we do have a web page, and we'll be updating that with this information. So I'm just going to highlight some of the main portions of the report itself. The first is just kind of some history, what the road safety program is, how it came about, that it's really meant to be a supplement to the ADOT statewide highway safety improvement program funding. And its main goal is to really provide some funding to address critical regional needs in the near term. And so we typically, the first round we did 2 years because we needed to get the fiscal year 2020 projects funded, but then we went ahead and also program fiscal year 2021. This coming really at the end of this week or in August, starting in August with the next call for projects, we will be doing on an annual basis for one fiscal year, kind of in keeping with the short-term needs as a goal. So you can see here that we have approximately $2 million that are projected funds for each fiscal year through fiscal year 2024 for a total of $10 million projected. For the 2020 projects, there were 7 projects that were funded in 5 different agencies for about $2.4 million. And then a little bit of history here for those of you who weren't participating in this committee last year. We took the policies and procedures to Regional Council in September of 2019, and they had approved that. And with that, we quickly issued the first call for projects in October. And in January of 2020, we had a recommendation to Regional Council to place those fiscal year 2020 and 21 projects into the TIP. So the next portion of the report just kind of highlights some of the projects that were funded for 2020. We had 2 in Apache Junction, 1 in Gilbert, 2 in Glendale, 1 in Scottsdale, and 1 in Surprise. And you can see the different project types that were funded. Some right turn channelization, positive offset median modifications, pedestrian hybrid beacons, and flashing yellow arrows, to name a few. My understanding is that the Surprise project and the Gilbert project are near completion. So meeting those short-term needs has, it looks like it's becoming a reality for us. So that's really encouraging. The fiscal year 2020 project timeline, we went into this, as I mentioned before, in a little bit of a hurry to get those projects underway. And so what I have shown here is kind of an abbreviated schedule, but the important thing to really focus in on here is the final expenditure deadline at the end of June of 2021. So that will be for these fiscal year 2020 projects. You'll need to have your final expenditure by June 30th of 2021 and your final reimbursement request into MAG around mid-July. The lower portion of the report that you'll see is just some of the, the combined program status. So all of the joint agency agreements, JAA stands for Joint Agency Agreement, and that's really the agreement between MAG and the local agency on the different responsibilities that they have for implementing their road safety their roadway safety program project. So we have 100% of those for 2020 executed. Design is complete on about 60% of the 2020 projects, and construction is complete on about 29% of those projects. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can kind of see a breakdown for each one of those projects in each local agency on the status of their project. So for instance, the Apache Junction project, the right turn channelization, is at about 28% completion. So, and that includes both design and construction. So for the financials for 2020 through 2024, as I mentioned before, we have a projected amount of about $2 million for programming in each fiscal year. In 2020, we actually were able to program over $2 million. It was about $2.4 million. If you add the two bars up, you get $2.433 million. In 2021, kind of the same thing. We programmed even a little bit more. So it's about $2.45 million that we were programmed. I'm going to have John Bullen step in here in a few seconds, but you'll see in 2022 that we have about $1.8 million to program for this call for projects that's going to be issued in the week's end or at the beginning of August. And then, as I mentioned, for 2023 and 2024, we're projecting $2 million as well. One of the things that we take into consideration for each year in the financials is if there are any cost savings that local agencies are recognizing through the construction of their project. The amount that you see will include some of the items that that John will be speaking to, but it also includes a potential cost savings from one of the fiscal year 2020 projects. We won't know exactly until we get the final reimbursement for that and it's closed out. So just for your information for the 2021 projects, the timeline, as you can see, we had the TIP approval by Regional Council on January 29th of 2020. The next major milestone would be the execution of the joint agency agreement, somewhere in mid-May of 2021. And then your notice to proceed for design, final design, July through October, with potential construction from November. And then again, really the date that you should really focus in on is your final expenditure at the latest June 30th of 2022 for those funded in fiscal year 2021. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Bullen. He's our Transportation, Economic, Finance, and Program Manager to kind of give you a briefing on the financials.
All right, wonderful. Thanks, Margaret. Mr. Chairman, members of the Safety Committee, happy to be here with you all today. Touch a little bit on the program financials. So as Margaret had spoke to earlier, when the program was originally created, we had established a set aside of approximately $2 million a year. Fortunately, as part of a federal legislation, the region saw a one-time infusion of additional federal funds last year that we, in effect, spread throughout all of our programs, including the roadway safety program. And it's this infusion which actually enabled us to program a bit more than what we had originally anticipated. When that programming was occurring, we were just using estimates at the time. Actuals have come in slightly lower than what we had originally estimated, not significantly, but that's in part the reason for the dip this year from 2 million down to 1.892, just taking into consideration the slightly less funding that we had received as part of that federal infusion. Good news is that when it's all said and done, this program will have received additional funding than what had originally been anticipated. We'll continue to track the funding closely, as Margaret had indicated to, continue to track projects as they develop, as they're completed. Should there be cost savings, we'll roll those into future calls, track that closely. So each year we can provide additional updates there. Also wanted to touch briefly too on sort of more global issues related to the program. So what has enabled this program to actually move forward is that we are working in partnership with ADOT to actually take some of the federal funding that's allocated to the MAG region and exchange that with some of the HERF funding that the MAG region received for freeway improvements. And so obviously with the pandemic, the COVID situation, ADOT's feeling the impact on the HERF side. We're working through what the future prospects look statewide. ADOT is mobilizing for what the potential implications there would be in the 5-year program. That being said, I want to provide some reassurance to this committee that we do anticipate that this program will continue to move forward and will fulfill the sort of original arrangement that had been set out. So something that we're tracking closely, but did want to provide some optimism to this committee that I think will be in good shape. So, and then lastly, as Margaret had touched on too, pleased to bring on Patrick Stone, head up the TIP group. So if you guys have any questions, any TIP related activities, please feel free to reach out to him. He started yesterday, but moving forward, he'll be your primary point of contact. And Margaret, I'll turn it over to you. I can answer any questions too, if anybody has them.
Thank you, John. Does anybody have any questions for John or myself? Okay. So with that, Mr. Chair, we do have an action that's required.
Thank you for your report, Margaret, and also to John for the information. Again, I'd like to ask, as this is something that we do need to approve as a committee, we basically need to approve the annual report. I'd make one more call. Does anybody have any questions or items that they would like to understand before we have a motion for approval? And I'll pause for just a bit to let anybody say anything.
This is Maria with the City of Mesa. Margaret, I do have a question. You started the presentation by saying that you were showing us a draft. Is there any potential to change based on a financial update, or is it like in formal form now?
So your audio is a little shaky, but if I understand your question correctly, you asked that when I started the presentation out that this was a draft, and if there's going to be any updates with regard to the financials. What's included in the draft includes the financials as they stand at this time. And so it's only draft right now because we need the recommendation from this committee to approve the report. And at that point, it'll go up on the webpage. But as John mentioned, it's something that I coordinate. Well, it's going to be myself and probably Patrick coordinating on a regular basis to kind of keep track of those financials. And so just for the purposes of this annual report, it reflects everything that we know as of now.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other questions or comments, could I have a motion for the approval to recommend approval of the 2020 Roadway Safety Program Annual Report?
I'll move to approve it. Kathy Hall.
I'll second.
Okay, so I have a motion to approve from Kathy Hollow and a second, was that from Shane Kiso?
Aaron with Gilbert.
Aaron with Gilbert, thank you for that. Okay, so at this point, I do need to poll the members by name for a yay or nay for agreeing to the approval. So we'll run through this again, and hopefully this moves. So with that, start with Shane Kiso of Apache Junction. Yay. Thank you. John Willett of Buckeye.
Yes, took me a while to unmute.
Thank you, John. Raymond Hung from Chandler.
Yay.
Nick Russo of El Mirage.
Yay.
Aaron Pinkerton of Gilbert.
Yay.
And we'd like to welcome Tony Abbo from Glendale. I saw he's joined.
Yay.
Thank you, Tony. Hugh Billick from Goodyear.
Yay.
Josh Plum from Maricopa City.
Yay.
Mazen Murdovich from Maricopa County.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Maria Deb from Mesa.
Yes.
Brandon of Peoria.
Yay.
Mohammed Youssef from Queen Creek.
Yay.
Sam Taylor of Scottsdale.
Yay.
Dana Oceana from Surprise.
Yay.
Kathy Hollow from Tempe.
Yay.
And we have Saroja from ADOT.
Yay.
And Jason Botchin.
Yay.
Thank you. Was there anyone that I missed? All right. With the motion and second and members polled on the phone, this motion passes. Thank you all. So now we will go back to item number 4, which is our safety in the next regional transportation plan, kind of momentum. So MAG has initiated efforts to develop a new regional transportation plan, an RTP, that will serve as the basis for the extension of the Proposition 400, which will expire at the end of the calendar year 2025. MAG staff will provide an update on the planning work underway, including technical work associated with the MAG Strategic Transportation Safety Plan, the STSP update, establishing safety as a cornerstone in the next RTP is anticipated to be a crucial component of this closely coordinated work. This committee has a unique opportunity through this discussion to help form that safety cornerstone. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to Margaret, also with Audra Kester-Thomas and Mike Blankenship. You guys can take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transportation Safety Committee. I'm going to go ahead and let Audra get started off.
Thank you, Margaret. Mr. Chairman, members of the Transportation Safety Committee, pleased to be with you here today and provide you an update on some of our early but feverish work in the development of our next regional transportation plan that will ultimately inform an extension of our current dedicated sales tax in Maricopa County for transportation. Next slide. Next slide. So I'm going to review a couple things. Just this orients you. We have many concurrent tasks here in the first half of the year. COVID really hasn't slowed us down too much. And so we are feverishly pulling together several items, which I'll provide an update on today. I'll start with a bit of an overview of our public engagement effort, do a little more detail on our naming for the plan, which is Momentum. Talk a little bit more about the technical effort, report out an activity for which I know many of you were involved in, which was the RTP call for projects that we issued earlier this year. Give you a high-level overview of where we stand based on that feedback, and then do a more detailed overview of where we stand for the rest of the year and the activities policy making that will really construct the framework for the RTP itself. Next slide. So just touch briefly on public engagement. Next slide. As Margaret had indicated, and I think has previously announced, we have named this next RTP Momentum, in part really to give homage to a very unique legacy in this region, which is the dedicated half-cent sales tax, which was originally established at MAG through the leadership of our mayors back in 1985. That was at that time extremely unique. Proposition 300, as most of you are quite familiar, really ultimately established what we know now today as the freeway network. Proposition 400, further developing that freeway network, but also a multimodal platform. And Momentum really acknowledges that unique investment. A sales tax initiative now is routinely utilized across the country as a mechanism for enabling transportation investments where federal funding falls short. And no different here. We can't wait, especially given our rapid growth, and acknowledge just how important transportation is to economic prosperity. I feel strongly that without the leadership of our mayors back in the 80s, and then continued support from our public, Phoenix, the metropolitan region, because of these transportation investments, would not be the economic engine it is for the state of Arizona today. Next slide. We'll be launching, here's a preview of our website. We'll be launching our website here quite shortly, really leveraging it now more than ever to garner feedback and public engagement. With the pandemic, we will not be able to have the traditional engagement activities that we had planned or envisioned. And similar to you at a local level, we're pivoting. And the good news is we had planned for a fairly robust online website portal to begin with. Good news, we'll already have that infrastructure to facilitate meetings, do some polling, survey work, and other interactive engagement with the public. So look for that launch soon. Next slide. But let's get into some more of the guts, if you will, of our early work. I want to provide a bit of an update on the RTP call for projects and give you just a bit of a summary of the kinds and scope of projects we received from that effort. Next slide. Before I get there, though, I want to just take a moment to orient ourselves on existing Proposition 400 era programs. We often use the term Prop 400, and a lot of times we orient that with the half-cent sales tax and characterize it just as a half-cent sales tax. But the reality is our 2003 plan, and ultimately what voters voted on, wasn't just a half-cent sales tax. We say we put all the money on the table. We put the federal projections on the table and utilize that to deliver the suite of programming as part of Proposition 400, similarly to what we did in Proposition 300. So while at MAG, we focus a lot on the Freeway Lifecycle Program and the Arterial Lifecycle Program. For any of those of you familiar with transit, Valley Metro with the Transit Lifecycle Program, that makes up, by and large, over 95% of the funding associated with the half-cent sales tax and federal funding portfolio. However, as you guys know, probably better than anybody, we have several smaller programs that, while maybe more localized improvements as a collective, ultimately deliver a regionally significant benefit. And so I've listed some of them here. You are, of course, familiar with the RSP program, which we just covered prior to my presentation, road safety assessment, safe routes to schools. But we have a handful of other programs as well. As a note, and you'll see perhaps later in my presentation, we actually expect the number of programs with the extension in the next regional transportation plan to grow. While capital funding and capital projects continue to be important, we recognize, and certainly our member agencies are telling us, there's a variety of diverse needs throughout the region. We expect there to be more and likely a continuation of several of these programs into the future. Next slide. So we issued the call for projects as directed by Regional Council back in January. It was ahead of our intended schedule. Our mayors really were focused on wanting to identify the projects they've had and you have in planning. And so we initiated that work in January. Originally had it scheduled to close at the end of March, but with the onset of the pandemic, extended that through middle of April. And when all said and was done, we received over 1,300 individual project and program submissions from all of you. So job well done on what I'm sure was feverish work for several of you. Next slide. So while we had that pie chart that kind of characterizes the modal anchors, if you will, at the end of the day, this is a better characterization of the types and kinds of projects that we received. I'm not going to go through them in detail. This is really here just to provide an overview. No surprise, freeway and highway, parkway considerations, not only new facilities, but modernizations and preservation of existing facilities. And I think of things that I could impress upon you today, and certainly not new news to any of you, what we're really faced with moving into this next generation of planning efforts and the trade-offs associated with future investment is the unique position that this region is in. We have largely focused on building new capacity. We are a fairly young metropolitan center, and our choices previously have been largely focused on responding to that growth. We continue to be the fastest city, town, county, region in the country. That capacity still is needed, but we also are now faced with maintenance and preservation needs, like so many of our other peers who've been wrestling with this for generations. And you'll see this will be a large trade-off conversation as we move ahead. And as you know, especially as we see dwindling proceeds coming in through HERF and other federal revenues. We received a lot of arterial roadway projects, roadway intersections, both arterial as well as other. I would asterisk this in particular. We see a lot of safety elements that came through several of these categories. Arterial intersections received a robust number, more than I think we were expecting, but you see those safety threads through so many of those projects. Active transportation, we received a robust number of active transportation projects above and beyond what we had recently included in the adopted active transportation plan just earlier this year. And then you'll see here asterisks for your benefit, both safety and ITS investments, continuation of existing programs, but new needs and considerations for which are germane, of course, to our continuing conversation later today. Just an acknowledgement that planning and support is acknowledged as a regional benefit, and then a variety of other kinds of infrastructure to a very small and localized level as well. Next slide. I wanted just to draw your attention to some of the things we didn't receive. Aside from the Gila River Indian community, we didn't receive paving of unpaved roads, street sweepers, or ride share, our air quality programs. Just to note that why I'm calling this out, because we are in a non-attainment area, we are required to air quality planning and ultimately establish mitigation measures to ensure the federal funding continues to flow into the region. And so these kinds of programs are expected, and the region is committed to continuing, if not expanding, to ensure that federal funding flows into the region now and into the future. I'd also acknowledge we didn't receive any FMS or large-scale technology submissions, but it's something that you and others, our member agencies, certainly acknowledge as important regional investments. And so we've asterisked that only because we recognize that's going to be a continued need into the future. Next slide. So I'm going to provide you just some updated sketch estimates of what this looks like as an overall portfolio. Next slide. Last fall, we actually provided a high-level overview of what our anticipated needs relative to projected revenues look like. And that was for our policymakers in the midst of conversations about enabling legislation, specifically about whether or not a continuation of the existing platform, a ½ cent for 20 more years, was the right mechanism to proceed with in this legislative session. You know, long story short, we calculated some initial projections back then and recognized that the consequences of the Great Recession and the economic downturn related with it has deferred a considerable amount of projects, so much so that it gives us pause, especially with the compounding need from our member agencies that is identified, as well as just system identified needs, that before we make some decisions, our elected officials wanted more information. So this is intended to give a rough magnitude of need as it relates to also our projected revenues. And while we provided those sketch estimates last fall, now that we have some of the feedback from the call for projects from our member agencies, we wanted to go back and update those numbers. Next slide. So what you'll see here in red are the augmentation from last fall, but I'll just cut to the chase. It is extremely clear to us that this region's continued growth, as well as realization of a growing maintenance backlog, as well as preservation need throughout the region, especially when we throw in a multimodal platform, is tremendous relative to the projected amount of revenues that we have. You'll see here some rough order of magnitude costs, kind of rounding out some of the modal categories, as well as the considerations that we've studied over time. We're looking at, at least upwards of $20 billion in freeway capital needs, the potential for an implementation of commuter rail, again, a sizable active transportation program desired, safety and technology being acknowledged as important investments, a robust amount of arterial needs, freeway operations and maintenance, as well as arterial operations and maintenance. So all in total, we're looking at, again, $60 to $90 billion. And this is just for starters. I would asterisk here, bus transit. We had done some early work with Valley Metro and City of Phoenix, our two main operators, last fall, just to get a better understanding of what a long-range transit program might look like. I can assure you from the call for project submissions that we received, there is a robust amount more of transit desired throughout our region, more so than is reflected in these numbers. On the other side is our revenues. We have a very limited set of revenues in this region compared to our peers across the country. A continuation of just the ½ cent sales tax is estimated to be about $15 billion over 25 years. And then you'll see the ADOT and federal funding flowing in through our region. Transit discretionary, that's one of those areas that we can augment our bottom line as we chase potential high capacity transit program. The highest competitive rail projects or fixed guideway projects in the country can compete against each other. And we've been able to fund several of our transit program or transit project programs here, light rail, and then also streetcar through the CIG program. So depending on how much high capacity transit and how competitive it is nationally, we could increase that bottom line. But you can see a considerable offset. We're looking at $30 to $35 billion in potential revenues compared to $60 to $90 billion in need. And I only point that out to illustrate just how difficult our future trade-off conversations will be. We continue to see a tremendous amount of transportation need. We can see the effect of a dwindling HERF proceeds to our bottom line, especially as it is relating to our freeway infrastructure and maintenance. For you at a local level, you know how much your cities rely on HERF for your pavement preservation programs. We're starting to really see the compounding effects of dwindling revenues and unsustainable revenue sources. Next slide.
Actually, Audra, I just unmuted myself, but if you could, before we go to the next slide, focus in on that safety, those safety numbers. And just a point of clarification, are those sketch costs for what you saw in the submissions? Or what do those numbers include?
Absolutely. So it's high-level estimates that include, you'll see we've recognized SM&O, the original work done just a couple of years ago, recognizing that some of that implementation fell after the Proposition 400 timeline. And so we've included those estimates of SM&O, but for safety and technology, we've been able to also identify, based on the call for projects, estimates that were submitted for the kinds of projects that were submitted by member agencies as part of that call. So it is intended to reflect what we received from the call for projects in addition to what we already knew.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we've been working through our management committee work group and then our policy committees to start some of the initial architecture of the next regional transportation plan. And I'm pleased to present to you now our vision and goals that have moved through our policy committee process. Next slide. Transportation vision here, robust, intending to think and shoot big. We want to deliver a world-class transportation system. And so again, you know, visions are intended to be those things that you stretch and want to achieve. And here we've outlined something that we want to ensure will deliver the world-class kind of region we think we will be. Next slide. 6 goals, and we attempted to really keep these short and sweet. You'll see no surprises necessarily here. I will acknowledge that safety is at the top of the list because of direct feedback we receive from our policymakers of its importance. And as you heard in the introduction today, how we really believe that safety will play a bigger role in shaping not just the regional transportation plan, but how we deliver investments in the region. Prosperity, so again, that economic competitiveness and growth. Responsiveness, acknowledgement that we need to be resilient, but also be flexible to now more than ever, changing needs in a dynamic innovation sphere. Livability, so this is where we've tucked our environmental and public health considerations. Preservation, the acknowledgement that this region's already put well over $10 billion into a multimodal regional system for which we want to ensure is maintained. And then mobility, the movement and ease of people and goods throughout the region. Next slide. Here, just a quick acknowledgement of our goals alignment to federal planning factors. Again, important to remember that over half of our funding comes as federal formula funding, and that alignment is really important. Next slide. Regional significance definition. So one of the pieces of feedback we received really over the course of the last year from member agencies as we did initial reconnaissance and what was important to member agencies as we endeavored on this effort was that a real direct acknowledgement that we didn't have a definition about regional significance. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, again, our federal funding is focused on regionally significant benefit. That's the anchor of our transportation model. It's also the anchor for our air quality conformity. But moreover, from a member agency perspective, is we kept hearing, well, what's eligible? What do we want to consider? And what's regionally significant? And so next slide, Margaret. We wanted to go through an effort to do a defined definition of a regional significance for purposes of developing the regional transportation plan. We started with FHWA guidance. We looked at our peers, hoping that somebody had a magic formula, and we found a variety of angles to regional significance, although I'll say for the majority of the large regions out there like ourselves, It's a very narrow definition. In some cases, it's just limited to highways, freeways, and fixed guideway transit. In some cases, regional significance is a threshold for costs. So projects that are at least $300,000, $400,000. And that's what makes or meets a regional significance definition. We actually wanted to go deeper. We wanted to make sure a regional significance definition represented the diversity of our region. And so we used the opportunity for the call for projects and all of the feedback you provided with it to dig through those submissions, see how you told your stories about why these projects were important to you, and really use that to help color our definitions. And then of course, we wanted to be sure that we were consistent with the legacy and precedent already set through propositions 300 and 400 in this region. Next slide. So we've defined two different constructs. We have a regionally significant project. So these are the tangible, deliberate projects. You see them as components in our existing life cycle programs, things that we can easily score, identify which are higher priorities, right? They're reflected in our model and are easily and tangibly distinct from each other. But then we also recognize there's a host of really important things that may be more localized in nature or may be unique to a certain part of the region. And so we wanted to acknowledge that through this regionally significant program construct. And again, you'll notice at the beginning of my presentation, I took a little bit of time to acknowledge we already have a legacy of, several handfuls of regionally significant programs that those projects may be more localized or smaller footprint, but taken as a whole reflect a regional priority. And so we wanted to make sure that we bundled those, identified those, and continued those considerations moving forward. Next slide. So highlight on where we are in the process and how we're going to get through those hundreds and hundreds of different projects. So next slide. You'll see a process diagram here, starting on your left side of the screen where we have the full needs catalog. Thank you, Margaret. This is important to note that this is not just those 1,300 submissions from member agencies. It includes those, of course, but already identified system needs, regionally studied investments that either came through a specific plan like an SMNO or a project level like a I-10, I-17 spine, but also acknowledging and scooping up all of the projects that have been deferred. Right now we're projecting Proposition 400 to have about 40% less in revenue over its 20-year horizon than we originally projected back in 2003. Unfortunately, I think the pandemic isn't going to make that any better. And so those represent real projects. Many of you are familiar with the projects for which you had planned would be delivered as part of this Proposition 400 investment strategy. We want to include those because we won't be able to deliver on all those projects. And so we need to catalog the entire universe of needs throughout the region. And right now we are doing that. It is a heavy lift. We're developing the infrastructure so that we're able to track all of those submissions, those individual candidate projects, and to the best of our ability, not only map out where they land, but use it as our anchor for evaluation. Our first step will be applying our regional significance, again, sorting out those big capital projects, their standalone items, from the series of probably many dozen different programs that will fall into future consideration. We'll take those major projects through a project level evaluation. We're working with our management committee work group right now on some of the cornerstones of how we want to evaluate those projects. That'll take us through this fall. And then here you'll see ultimately in step 3, we'll be able to step back and identify, what projects through that technical evaluation are higher priorities than others or score better than others. And then married to that, a series of programs for which are deemed from our policymakers to be regionally significant. We'll use those two groupings to move into scenario planning over the winter. And that's where we get to apply tough questions. This is the sausage making process where we recognize we won't be able to deliver everything. but we need to better understand what we can deliver and what the trade-offs associated with them are, as well as apply some what-if scenarios to understand just how resilient different projects or collections of projects through programs will be for our region. So this is where we would apply the construct of what happens if we go above a half cent and actually successfully deliver a full cent in a transportation sales tax. What else can we get with that additional revenue source? What if we added commuter rail? What if we didn't do commuter rail? And we're going to be able to play some of those major trade-off and policy questions this winter to ultimately see the composition of what we can deliver. Next slide. So just a couple summary points here. We will be launching our website soon. We are in the depths of developing our robust needs catalog, working with our management committee work group on a performance-based evaluation framework specifically for those high capacity transit projects. And then already starting our conversations to facilitate more refined revenue projections, especially better understanding the federal portfolio, which we see as, highly risky, depending, especially when you look over, decades, and the realization that the Highway Trust Fund is insolvent itself. So we have difficulties both at a state level, but also at a federal level that we want to make sure that we have a more firm understanding of the assumptions going into our next sales tax initiative. Next slide. So that is a high-level overview of where we stand with the RTP. Margaret, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of if you want to stop here for questions before moving on to the subsequent parts of the presentation.
Yeah, that's a really good idea, Audra. If members of the committee have questions thus far of Audra, I've asked her to stick behind through, how the next part of the presentation is going to be how our work in developing the safety plan connects to all of this. And so I've asked her to stick behind if she hears any discussion that she's really interested in, and we want to hit on a little bit more in depth, or if she hears us veering slightly off of kilter from the way momentum is going. I also wanted her to kind of step in and redirect us, I guess. So with that, we can open it up to questions regarding momentum at this time, and then we'll move on to how it connects to the work we're doing.
We all know how to get a hold of me if you need anything.
Thanks, Audra.
This is Carl Langford with City of Phoenix. I do have a question. In that big safety bucket that you guys kind of got, just kind of curious of the projects and things, how much of that was kind of a program request versus specific projects request in the safety?
That's Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. That's a really great question. Forgive me for not having memorized the 1300 to do Q&A, but I will tell you that by and large, while there were definitely some safety projects, deliberate ones, by and large, the flavor, if you will, were really programmatic in nature. And in part, that's because several of the projects that were submitted are fairly small, they're localized, and we wouldn't evaluate or consider those at a RTP level. What we're doing is we're recognizing, there's seemingly a need for continued safe routes to school studies, right? And we're going to package those as part of a program for future consideration. So by and large, I would say the majority of what we saw really will be largely evaluated as a program, or I'm going to argue series of programs related to safety, and not necessarily discrete individual safety projects, especially large scale. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move on for Audra? Okay, Mr. Chair, if you don't have any objection, I'll move on.
Go ahead and move on, Margaret.
Okay, Mike Blankenship has had to ring off for a few minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in for him.
Actually, Margaret, I am back on, but feel free to plow through, and I'm here for questions or
great.
jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Mike, then in that case. I do have some notes and expect me to jump in here on a couple of the slides, but for the purposes of this portion, take it on.
Okay, so I assume you'll control the slides there, Margaret?
That's correct. Just
Okay.
say next slide.
Yep, go ahead. So basically giving you an update, and a lot of these slides you've seen before, but we wanted to especially update you on some of the comments that we've received back since the last meeting from both the Safety Committee and our Safety Stakeholders Group. So we're trying to tie our strategies for the safety plan into the safe system approach, which really has been adopted by Vision Zero programs, both in this country and really around the world, that really look at 5 key elements: safe road users, safe roadways, safe vehicles, safe speeds, and then safe post-crash emergency response types. And a lot of this boils down to trying to separate as many vulnerable road users from vehicles as we can. Next slide. And there's a hierarchy of control for traffic safety that kind of says, hey, the biggest bang that we can get is to totally eliminate exposure to a potential crash. Have multi-use trails instead of sidewalks right up against the road, or multi-use trails instead of bike lanes. So as you work your way down this inverted pyramid, it's probably easier to implement, but you're not going to get as much benefit from the safety strategy. Next slide. And again, these are the 5 key areas associated with the safe system approach. And one of the I guess, key criteria with safe system approach is none of these 5 areas by itself is sufficient to drive these fatal crash numbers down. We need all of these in place. But having said that, if we do have all of these in place, if one of them does fail for whatever reason, there should be enough redundancy built into the system that the crash doesn't end up taking somebody's life. You can see that most of these 5 categories we are dealing with in terms of strategies in the safety plan update. The one that jumps out that we're not really able to address is the safe vehicles. But on the other hand, we can encourage and educate on the use of safety components within those vehicles, using seatbelts specifically, which will bring down fatal crashes. Next slide. So an example from that pyramid, at the top of the pyramid, eliminating exposure would be at an intersection where we're seeing a lot of left turn crashes and left turn fatal crashes. So the obvious solution is to prohibit those left turns, remove that exposure, or to provide protected only left turn phasing, which really should eliminate all left turn crashes except for those that involve someone running a red light. Next. An example with the speed is where we would screen to see if there is opportunity to institute a speed management policy, whether that includes stepped up enforcement, education, putting up some speed feedback signs. And a way to screen for that would be to look at some of our socioeconomic and demographic data to see if there are these types of road users in a community or along a corridor, and then really apply some strategies to that. So older users and transit users, bus stops, young users, those that are forced to walk or ride bikes, and then land use, Circle K on one side of the road, a park or a school on the other side of the 5-lane arterial. Next. So we wanted to just quickly give you an update of what we showed you last time in terms of the draft vision, goal, action areas, and strategies that we've developed, and some of the comments and some of the changes we've made based on comments. Next. So the draft vision was no death or injury is acceptable. We've had some really good feedback, and a couple of them that were jumping out here in the word balloons. Everyone gets home safely, or everybody deserves to get home safely. And again, if anybody has feedback, we had asked for feedback, I think, due yesterday, but we would take additional feedback on these in the next couple of days as we're finalizing them. And even as Margaret presents these to different policy committees, we'll still take feedback as we're finalizing these. Go ahead. You can go ahead.
I was trying to unmute myself. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
The screen wouldn't come down. I just wanted to mention too that the feedback that we requested was from the stakeholders group. This is this group's opportunity to give us additional feedback on these different areas at the end. We're going to be asking for some consensus on some of these things. We've received some consensus from the stakeholders group, and as Mike mentioned, I'm going to be potentially taking some of these higher level ideas that we've already established, or recommendations of what we've established to the policy committee meetings in August. And so we are preparing for that, and we want to make sure that we include all of your feedback and discussion. So with that, I will move on to the next slide.
Maybe. So our draft goal, you see on the left there, establish regional culture of safety. Some key comments that we received back was it really wasn't strong enough or deliberate enough. So specific comments on how we could improve that goal. On the left there, helps to ensure their own safety and the safety of others through actions, attitudes, and behaviors. And then on the right, we had a question: can we somehow clarify that everyone includes decision makers, professionals, so that it doesn't look like we're just talking about the road users, pedestrians being safer, drivers being safer, not speeding, those types of things. That's part of it, but it's also at the upper level of planning and making decisions and deciding where funding is spent. Next. So again, just to remind you, the 4 action areas based on looking at the crash data: pedestrians, intersections, lane departure, and then safety related data, or how we use the data, getting more accurate data, and just some of the key criteria there with those 4 action areas. Pedestrian deaths have just skyrocketed in the region, more than doubling in the last 10 years. Over half of the non-freeway crashes are at intersections. Over half of our fatals are lane departures, running off the road, or head-on type of crashes. And then on the safety data action area, we see in some of the RSAs and studies that we've done that up to a third of crashes can be miscoded at intersections. They were coded as an angle crash, really should have been a left turn crash. Next.
Am I unmuted still?
Oh, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I just wanted to jump in really quick. We are often asked by those that aren't necessarily used to looking at the data that this committee is, or people on this committee. We get asked a lot about, population and VMT and things like that. So just to draw some perspective, to kind of speak to that, for the 10-year period that we looked at for this crash data, 2009 through 2018, the MAG planning area population increased nearly 20%. In terms of VMT over the 10-year period, the MAG region VMT is approximately 60% of Arizona VMT. In addition, Arizona VMT has increased just over 7% over the 10-year period, while the MAG region VMT has increased over 10% over the 10-year period. So when looking at the areas, and I'm somewhat preaching to the choir here, that when you look at the fact that the pedestrian deaths in the MAG region have increased 133%, it's almost it's almost irrelevant. I would venture a guess that the loved ones of the people who have died on our roadways don't really care how many vehicles were on the road, or those that are recovering from some of the injuries that they've sustained from being a roadway user. They're not really as concerned with that. And when we are doing our work in developing a safety plan, we really want to focus more on the people, the pedestrians, the people that are in our intersections, and even some of our rural areas with the lane departure. And it's not just rural areas. There's over half of the MAG region fatalities are related to lane departure. And so this is basically our backup of why we're looking at these action areas and why this committee, as well as the stakeholders group, found it important to focus on these action areas.
Yeah, it's really about making the safety story personal. I mean, obviously we have to show data and numbers and number of people killed, but it's bringing it down to that personal level. I think that's going to help create a culture of safety that we really need in the region. Next. So as you recall, we had tons and tons of strategies, and we'll look at a few of them here in a minute, but some of the comments again that we've received, concepts and strategies can get tossed aside for convenience, making a connection between the strategies and the 4 E's, education, enforcement, engineering, and emergency response. And so we're trying to group these strategies and present them in a slightly different way based on some of these comments that we're receiving. Next.
So Mike, if you don't mind me jumping in again. So one of the things is I sorted through the over 70 strategies that were initially recommended for consideration. And, obviously we had some comments such as what you're seeing on the screen about there was some confusion between the connection of the strategies and the 4 E's, and it was difficult to do so. And what became clear to me is that we really need to merge those 4 E's with the safe systems approach. And so under the safe systems approach and the promotion of a culture of safety, addressing all the 4 E's prompts some questions. And those questions are, for instance, engineering. Does this mean, under the safe systems approach, this could mean the system and the environment. So this would mean all stages of implementing system improvements, funding priorities, planning, data-driven analysis, design, and maintenance. So that really includes everyone that is responsible for or prioritizes system improvements or new systems. As far as education is concerned, do we mean the public? I think it can include the public. It can be ourselves as safety practitioners. It can be using data effectively and using new sources of data. Mike mentioned a little bit earlier about using some socioeconomic data and not just basing everything off of crash data. This could also be education of policy and decision makers on the importance of the system improvements and policies. And then to enforcement, it doesn't necessarily just mean under a safe systems approach, those who enforce policies. It also means those who, or it doesn't mean those who just enforce traffic laws, but it also could include those who enforce policies within agencies. Also, user self-policing. Are there changes that we can make to the system where we feel it more natural to slow down in some areas where the conditions warrant that? So, and then of course the emergency management systems or post-crash care, they also need a better environment to reduce their risk, and those are the users in their path, really. standardization and system-wide existence of pre-exemption can reduce response times and also help them make their path safer in those that are in their path. So I just kind of wanted to respond to some of the comments that we were getting, and they're absolutely spot on in saying that it was really hard. I mean, for me, when I was putting those together and highlighting which one of those strategies fell under which E, it was kind of easy for me to see that because I've been entrenched in the safe systems for a very long time. Even when I put the scope for the safety plan together, I was so entrenched in it. But for others, and I really appreciated everybody chiming in and saying, hey, that there's no connection there for me. So I wanted to make sure and highlight where that connection could be.
So again, you've seen these, but we just wanted to show you, we've cleaned some of it up. We've made it a little more, not user-friendly, but easier to understand and comprehend in terms of the graphics and numbers that we're showing on some of these infographics. So this would be with pedestrian deaths. Next. Some comments on some of the pedestrian strategies and crash reduction factors that we were showing on this infographic. Make sure that we include hawks, pedestrian signals, and rectangular rapid flashing beacons on the infographic. Make sure that, you know, we're showing anything we're showing here is backed up by the data. Next. Our lane departure infographics, again, just cleaning it up a little, making it more understandable. Next. So Margaret mentioned we had about 70 some strategies. One of the comments is, hey, that's just way too many. Let's prioritize, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Adding some more proactive and maybe maintenance related strategies. And this is a good idea because a lot of the strategies we're focusing on are more of reactive. After a crash or a certain type of crash occurs, what should we do to reduce that potential for crashes? But just making sure that signing and markings are visible, especially for our nighttime and our lane departure related crashes. RPMs, raised pavement markers, where we don't have street lighting. And then for those vehicles that do run off the road, making sure that we've removed or addressed any type of pavement edge drop off. So whether that's with safety edge or just doing routine maintenance to make sure that we don't have that couple inches of drop off. And it doesn't take much of a drop off to create a safety problem once you get beyond an inch or two of drop off of the paved section. Next. So in terms of prioritizing strategies, we were wanting to look at what we're calling high value strategies or high value countermeasures. Which of these strategies have the biggest influence on reducing the people that have been impacted, that have been killed, that have been seriously injured, their families' lives have been impacted by these crashes. So that's part of the high value end of it, in conjunction with which of these strategies are really feasible for you guys, the local agencies, to implement? I mean, it's one thing to make a recommendation for a strategy, but if City of Phoenix, there's no way they're ever going to implement it, it's not a good strategy. Next. So the second part of the strategy, or first part of the strategies that we want to look at, is kind of the screening. Where are we having issues? And so strategies and recommendations on how to identify where those opportunities are. Network screening, looking at the data beyond the crash data that we've already mentioned, making sure that safety is a key component when we're prioritizing and scoring our projects, continuing to conduct our road safety assessments, and especially considering doing RSAs in the design stage. The negative offset left turn lanes that continue to be designed into projects inadvertently that creates sight distance issues. So these design stage RSAs can catch things like that before it's actually built, save a lot of money and ultimately save lives. And then encouraging the use of electronic crash reporting. Next. And then the next couple slides get into those high value countermeasures that we just defined. And most of these would be on the lower end, less costly. But the second one there, roundabouts, that's definitely a high dollar, high ticket item. But roundabouts also has one of the highest crash reduction factors for intersections, serious injury and fatal crashes at intersections. So it is high value. It's going to cost a lot, but you're going to get tremendous value for that cost. So we're taking those 70 strategies and trying to narrow them down to these high value or higher priority countermeasures. Next. Again, most of these are fairly inexpensive to implement, and they'll be in the list of high value countermeasures. Next. And then the third part of the strategies would be recommendations or strategies for communicating that safety message, telling the story. Obviously, task 4 of this safety plan was developing the pedestrian and bicyclist safety education and enforcement program. We've got 4 pilot cities there that are going to be implementing this in the spring and fall of next year. We would like to see this take off regionally, where most, if not all, of the agencies within the MAG region are doing some type of a pedestrian and bicyclist education and enforcement campaign. Again, showing all of the data that we have in a way that helps to change behavior of all of those key classes of people that we talked about: the road user, the decision makers, the planners, the engineers. And then using targeted enforcement where we do have those high risk locations that were identified through that first series of strategies, the screening process, the identification process. Next.
So Mike, I slipped in a slide, so I'll take this one. But
sure.
I just wanted to, this committee has not yet seen these. I just received them yesterday myself. And I think I may have mentioned in one of our previous meetings that we have a whole other task force that we have convened as kind of a sub-task group within the development of the STSP, specifically for task 4, to develop this PBC program, Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Education Enforcement Program. And this is the bulk of what they have been working on. I know they look really simple, but that's intentional. We wanted that. The logo that you see here is meant to be a standalone at some point. But these are kind of basis posters, if you will, that we're going to be using. Some of the ideas that were discussed, and we spent many months revising these base posters that can be used for many different initiatives that might come out of this program. But some of the main ideas that were discussed in that task force was really really encouraging the messaging of that's the responsibility of all users, a rejection of finger pointing and victim blaming, and that there be an action on the part of all users of the roadway. And so we did want to make 3 specific products, for one geared more towards pedestrians, one more geared towards bicyclists, and one more geared towards motorists or drivers. But they all kind of interconnect, and we're hoping that the message here is that it's not just the pedestrians' responsibility, but it's also the driver's responsibility, bicyclists, so on and so forth. We are going to be developing a web page. What you see down at the bottom here is just kind of a placeholder. That's not really the web page, but we're going to be working on developing that web page. Everything that's going to be developed for the toolkit will be housed on that web page for local agencies to use whenever they want. We're going to be working on developing the actual pilot program. We have some local agency enforcement staff or traffic enforcement staff that are on that task force, and so they've been giving us some really good feedback on what that framework for the pilot should look like. And then you'll see here at the bottom right-hand side of each one of these that you can put your own logo on here if you want to use these materials for a period of time that you want to do some engagement with your police force. You can put your logo on here. So it's all very modifiable for various program initiatives. So,
Margaret, hi, this is Maria. And thank you for sharing the slogans with me. I just have 2 comments. One of them is it wasn't readily observable from the person on the bike that he has a helmet. I would maybe suggest another way of making sure that the helmet is seen so everybody knows to use a helmet, and bike light if that's possible, as well as the pedestrian seems to be crossing, so maybe identify that he's in a crosswalk or something. Just minor details, but that is important for us when we are telling everybody to be safe. We need to acknowledge and identify the safety measures.
right, yeah. I think so. Making the helmet bigger, maybe on the bicyclist, making it stand out a little bit more. And I think, Mike, if I remember correctly, we had discussed inclusion of a crosswalk, but I think one of the counterpoints to that was that the pedestrian may not be in a crosswalk. And we wanted to make these generic enough to where people would also get the idea that this could be anywhere, anyone. It's not one specific person or one group of people, but this could be anyone. This could be me tomorrow. So we can revisit that as well. But again, just to kind of keep each one of these as simple as possible as we create more tools for the toolbox. One of the things that we could consider is having a crosswalk.
Margaret, this is Brandon. I wanted to chime in on that a little bit as well, if it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as I'm seeing these, my first instinct is to think, okay, how does it need to be fixed? And I kept thinking of all these scenarios that made these messages a lot more complex. So I decided to use different judgment and just keep my mouth shut and think about these for a little while. And I realized I really do like their simplicity. And every scenario I think of, you mark a crosswalk, because I was thinking for the bicyclist, well, there's a lot of concerns with cars turning right in front of cyclists that are with the through movement in the bike lane. But it makes these messages so much more complex. And the genius of these is they are simple and they get you thinking about looking for other people. So I almost would say, I really like them how they are. And I think anything that we change would just make them, we kind of dilute the message and make it too much. So I do actually like these as they are. And to that point too, pedestrians can be anywhere. In fact, one of the pet peeves I've developed over the years is, when you hear of a pedestrian crash, the first thing they say is the pedestrian wasn't in the crosswalk. So people say, oh, well, of course they deserve to be hit. They weren't in a crosswalk. Well, per state law, you're allowed to cross anywhere for the most part. And it almost makes the pedestrian, it's blaming the victim. And of course, maybe both were at fault. Usually that is the case to some extent. But I just don't like the narrative that creates when we think, a crosswalk is the only official crossing location that's acceptable and safe. And that's not always the case. And if you're not in the crosswalk, it doesn't mean you were wrong necessarily either. Anyway, I'll think about it more, but I really do like these as they are. And I'd like to put them on our web page and kind of have them on a circulating loop. So, a few seconds of each one. So, people that visit our web page get a chance to see all 3 of them.
Sure, absolutely. And so the intent is for, and again, these are just base materials. We can make different materials that kind of show this in a little bit different way, but all our member agencies, and really anybody in Arizona for that matter, would be able to download and utilize this information for their own purposes. So,
and to Brandon's point, I also like that they're simple. The person just seems that the pedestrian is crossing or is going to be in conflict with the car. That's why I said a crosswalk. But if the pedestrian is not crossing and is just either standing or walking towards another direction, then seeing you without a crosswalk is possible. It's just something that was a little bit concerning, that conflict that seems to be apparent between the person walking towards the vehicle.
This is Brandon again. If I could make one more point, because Maria saying that kind of triggered it, is it seems like the message is be aware of your surroundings and others, and it could be anywhere. But to address Maria's point, maybe by just making the vehicle a little bit smaller, that with that that might address the concern just from that perspective. But I mean, I like the idea that the message is basically just be aware of others in the environment, and even if it's pedestrians up on a sidewalk, just be aware of what's going on around you. Is that correct? That's kind of the base message. Just see me, Arizona.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know, Mike, if you can think of like specific discussions that we had regarding this, but yeah, that was kind of the base idea of this. And again, really encouraging that it's the responsibility of all road users, and not just the bicyclist, not just the pedestrian. I don't know, maybe addressing Maria's comment might be, and that the pedestrian just be standing, but so there's more room for consideration on that. And I'd be interested to hear if anybody else has any additional comments on this. And of course, as I mentioned, these may be in front of the policy committees, and I may be getting some additional feedback from them. So this may, it took us a while to get to this point, but that doesn't mean that, we won't be taking into consideration other input and feedback.
Yeah, and I think Brandon hit the nail on the head. I mean, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible and focus on this seeing and being seen, being aware. I mean, obviously we could throw a seatbelt on every driver in these graphics. We can put a crosswalk in there. We can make a helmet bigger. And all those are safety concerns and things that should be doing. But again, we wanted to keep the message simple here and, be aware. Just because you can see the driver if you're a pedestrian or bicyclist doesn't mean that they're seeing you.
Margaret, it's Kathy. I have a question. Not knowing what the subcommittee discussed, but what about other modes, like the other extremes of like micromobility or public transit? Is that just not included? I mean, it's all like cars against the world. Is that because those are the highest vehicle, or type of vehicles that we see in accidents, or it's just a simpler way to present it?
So the task,
we have micromobility too. So,
right. So I think that a couple of different things, Kathy. One is that this task was developed to specifically address pedestrian and bicycle safety. So, and then the second thing is that I think if there are elements of micromobility that the local agency wants to address with however they're going to be utilizing these, they could certainly implement some of those things within that. We didn't want to necessarily put the whole gamut of, scooters, whatever, hoverboards, whatever, again, because it would have kind of detracted from the message. One of the ways that we thought about it was that the pedestrian really represents anything going under the speed of a bicyclist, right? So that could include, and technically, and Brandon can probably chime in if I'm wrong, but technically, any of those other modes, I mean, you're still a pedestrian in those modes, and similar with the bicyclist. So
it depends on the speed, right?
Right.
That they're allowed to go.
Right. So, and again, just trying to keep it simple, but there's no reason why Tempe couldn't, if they wanted to do something specific with regard to scooters, there's no reason why you, Kathy Hollow, couldn't direct some of your staff to do that. But we didn't want to make it universal because not everybody in the MAG region or in the state has those similar issues. So again, kind of keeping it simple to where it could be modifiable to whatever purpose you saw fit.
Okay, thank you. It kind of jumped out at me because you had the two different pedestrian types, the walker and the ADA individual, and then the bike one, you could have had a bike, and then the bottom could have been something different. But again, I appreciate the keeping it simple. And the only other question I have is, has anyone else heard the "see me" phrase on TV? And there's some there's some medicine out there that uses "see me." I think it's for a skin condition or something. Has anyone else heard that? Maybe it's not as prevalent as I thought. They say it over and over again on that commercial, and every time I see this, I think of that, but nobody else sees it. That's fine.
One of the things that we really bang our head up against the wall with all of this over the past, since like last October, was making sure that it was a unique phrase, one, and that kind of elicited the response that we wanted for the intent. And so we'll have to take a look at that. But I think we had our communications group look into that. And
I think if you Google "see me" ads, it'll pop up.
Okay. Okay, we should probably move on unless anybody has any other input. And it, we're running we are kind of running short on time. So, and we have quite a bit to get. If anybody has any additional input on these, please feel free to forward those to me by email.
So I think we've hit on a lot of this already, and some of the things that Audra showed. Go ahead to the next slide there. Yeah, trying to use the common lingo, Prop 400 era for the current RTP, and then momentum for any of the new things that we've been talking about. Go ahead. Margaret, I'm not sure how much of this you want to hit on, because again, a lot of this Audra has already covered.
Right. So just kind of drawing a connect. Let me maybe it comes up here soon, but just trying to draw where. So a lot of the things that we're going to be implementing with the safety plan are the details that are going to kind of come behind. But it's the kind of the higher level, either policies and I think maybe we can skip this. But one of the things that I did want to highlight on this slide, and specifically, was on the right-hand side. We talked a lot about those high value, and those would be either the AASHTO or the FHWA countermeasures or high value countermeasures. One of the things that we are looking into doing, and again, how it fits into momentum, is that we could develop a toolkit. And if we are promoting the safe systems approach as well as a culture of safety, not just for road users, but those who plan and prioritize projects, to utilize this toolkit where it would, if you have this condition and this condition with your socioeconomic and that kind of data coupled with certain areas that would, or certain similar areas that we've seen where, we've had a lot of this type of crash. You might want to consider putting, this safety countermeasure in your project. And that wouldn't just mean a safety project, that could mean any project that would come out of the RTP or be implemented in the RTP as a priority project. So that's one area where the strategies that we're looking at in the safety plan are going to be more potentially fully developed in the use of a toolkit for RTP priority projects. And again, when we talk about the road safety program, now through 2024, we're going to be really identifying some good safety projects, and where is there a potential for us to make some similar safety improvements in other areas, so we can develop kind of a backlog of roadway safety program type projects so that we can demonstrate the importance of that as a funding priority in momentum. So these are, safety policies. And again, one of the things that Audra really impressed upon us when we had a discussion with her was that when it comes to this phase of the development of the RTP, what we're looking at is, and as far as safety, is some of the higher level ideas. And as I mentioned, the work that we're going to be putting into completing the development of the safety plan, as well as implementing this update to the safety plan, will really provide that detail during the momentum era, I guess. All right, Mike.
So again, I think we've kind of hit on this already, but with momentum, we want to make sure that key programs that may come out of this STSP get included in there, whether it's the ped bike education and enforcement program, or design level RSAs, or intersection related programs, improving negative offsets, whatever it might be. But the specific strategies getting down to the project level will be addressed at the project level. Go ahead. So
let's stop for a second and see if there's any discussion regarding. I know we stopped a little bit to talk about the PBC program and the materials, but I would be interested to know if there's any questions or comments regarding, our work moving forward. And it'll become a little bit more clear when we get into the phase where we actually develop an action plan for the STSP, where we'll, put some of the countermeasure type strategies into like a bucket, and put some of the other things into another bucket, and how we're going to implement those. And then on some of them, we'll be identifying, specific project types that we can put, that are also strategies that we can put some planning level costs to. So it'll become a little bit more clear, and you're going to see them again through that process. So don't think that this is the last time that you're going to be seeing them. But I'd be interested to hear if there are any questions or discussion on kind of how our work and how it connects to momentum. Okay. So because we are coming up on noon, one of the things that we wanted to do during this meeting is kind of come up with, gain a consensus or really get some feedback on any members, if they are opposed to anything that we are recommending with regard to the vision, goal, action areas, and strategies. And again, the strategies are really the high level strategies, the 4 buckets I just talked about. So any more feedback on that would be appreciated. And if that's something, you know, due to time here, if that's something that we need to do offline, we can certainly do that. But I'm going to be potentially preparing for management committee starting tomorrow. So any feedback that you can provide on the vision, goals, action areas, and strategies would be greatly appreciated. So kind of the next steps here is obviously continued coordination with Audra and her team through the development of momentum. And as I mentioned, we're going to be taking the vision, goal, action areas and some of the high level strategies to the MAG policy committees in August timeframe. We have task 7 that will probably be released, the task report for that to you all, as well as the stakeholders group here in the next few weeks for safety implications of emerging technologies. Task 8 will be starting to look at safety performance reporting. The draft plan is where we're going to start looking at that action plan that I spoke of. And then this project is due to, the contract ends December 31st of 2020. So by then we will have developed the final plan and gone back to policy committees for approval of that plan. And here's the contact information for each one of us, should you need it. And I think that completes the discussion on this particular item, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Margaret and Mike and Audra, for the presentations. One question I have, I think a lot of people due to time maybe are avoiding some discussion. Is there a deadline when you would like comments sent into you regarding some of this?
It would be great if I could get it by a week from now. So that would be August 4th.
So I would ask the members of the committee if we could take a chance to look this over a little bit more in detail. Probably send an email to Margaret directly with any comments that you have. Inside the chat has been posted a link to where all these presentations are so that we can review these presentations. This is an excellent opportunity for us to help provide guidance for these programs as they move forward. With that, our next item on the committee is reports by committee members. Due to time constraints, I will just pause for a minute and say anyone that has any reports they specifically want to give, you can unmute yourself or mention in the chat box that you want to specifically. So I'll pause for just a minute for that. And if anybody wants to do a report, go ahead. So. Okay, it sounds like we all want to make it to lunch. Next item is request for future agenda items. Does anybody have anything they would like to request specifically here? All right, seeing none, we will move on. The next meeting that we will have will be on Tuesday, September 22nd. At 10 a.m. It will be planned as a virtual conference similar to this one at the moment. So with that, we can go ahead and adjourn, and we will see you all in 2 months. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and for the discussion.
Thank you, everyone.